All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is part two of our circulatory system. It's all about the blood pressure regulation and also the cardiac cycle. So really just what is causing the blood to flow through the body. So let's see, we'll get this set up, and I have an animation, so hopefully it works. So here's a little cartoon to get you started. You can take a peek at that. Get into this a little bit when we talk about the different types of blood cells, but one of the white blood cells is called a leukocyte. Okay, so here's the video. Hopefully it works. This is just a fish heart that's outside of the body. So what I want you to think about is when you see it, we'll start. So as you can see, it's still beating. And so the question is if it's not attached to your body anymore, if there's no blood flowing through it, if it's not attached to your brain, then why is it able to continue to beat? So in order to answer that question, what you need to know is a little bit about this specific type of tissue that's in our heart, which is called nodes. And all a node is it's just a spot of nervous tissue. So this stuff here, the sinoatrial node and the atrioventricular node, both of those are responsible for causing causing the muscle in the heart to contract. Excuse me. They have the ability to do this independently, which means that if there's no stimulus from the brain, it still does. So the brain isn't what necessarily tells your heart to contract, it's these nodes. Okay? The first one is called the sinoatrial node, or the SA node. This is the most important one in terms of function. As you can see, it's connected through this nervous tissue to the AV node. The AV node stands for, well, atrioventricular. We'll get there in a second. So the SA node, you can see that it's along the chamber of the heart, of the right atrium. We call this the pacemaker. So you've probably heard of people that have had to have artificial pacemakers put into their heart. It's because this node isn't working anymore. So what they do is they have a artificial one that provides the same function. So what's the function? Both of these are just necessarily for these muscle contractions. So the second one is called the atrioventricular node. So it's between the atrium and the ventricle of the right side of the heart. It's a little bit deeper inside the heart, and it's close to the AV valve. So that's where it gets its name from. So function now. This SA node, the sinoatrial node, is responsible for the contraction of the heart. So this initiates the initial contraction. So what happens once this blood starts pooling in the right atrium? It stimulates the SA node to contract the atria. So it contracts here, and if it contracts, it pressurizes this blood and goes through the AV valve. And this one's going to be the tricuspid and down into the right ventricle. Once it's in the right ventricle, there's another impulse that comes down, and it comes from the SA node. So this is a split second after. So SA node tells the atrium to contract, boom, then the SA node sends an impulse to this AV node, which then causes the right ventricle to contract as well. So blood comes through here, now we're pooled. This AV node tells this area to contract. So what it's going to do is cause that blood to go through the semilunar valve and out of the heart towards the lungs. Okay, so that's what's responsible for squeezing it down, squeezing it out, and then towards the lungs. Happens the same on the other side of the heart as well. When this starts to pool, the SA node tells this contract, it squeezes it down into the left ventricle. This AV node tells the ventricle to contract, and then it will be squeezed out to the aorta. So it's the same function on both sides of the heart. And if you guys have ever heard the boom, 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 boom of the heart, what's responsible for that sound is after the blood gets pushed through the valves and the contraction stops, the valves slam shut. So the first boom, boom. So I guess the boom at the very first part is due to this valve, the tricuspid and the bicuspid collapsing. And then the second boom is due to the semilunar valves going out your aortic artery and your pulmonary artery. Okay, so what are Purkinje fibers? Purkinje fibers are these things down here. As you can see, they look like little veins, but what they are, it's nervous tissue or nerves, and what they do is when the AV node sends a signal for the ventricles to contract, it sends it along these Purkinje fibers. So what happens is more surface area, it allows that impulse to be stretched to all areas. Because if you look, it's a lot thicker on the ventricles than it is for the atria, so it needs these extra Purkinje fibers to maximize the message that's sent out. Okay, so when you think of Purkinje fibers, think of them as like a ally to the AV bundle, okay, or the AV node. Sorry. So I said before that these impulses work independent of the brain, but what the medulla oblongata has the ability to do is to regulate that heart rate. So, for example, if we want to start breathing faster, and start our blood pumping faster, the medulla oblongata can tell it to start pumping faster, and it's going to get more and more oxygen into its blood and CO2 out. Like we talked about in the respiratory system, when that medulla detects the changes in pH, wants to get rid of it faster, wants to increase our breathing rate. Well, if we're increasing our breathing rate, we're going to have to increase our circulatory rate too to keep up. So it sends a signal to the SA node to start speeding up or slowing down the nervous contractions. Okay, so it's kind of like overrides any of the SA node's messages. So blood pressure now. So we've talked about this last unit in excretion. Blood pressure is the force of blood against the vessel walls. So the more volume that there is, more volume of blood, the more pressure. And it's the greatest pressure when the ventricles contract than when they're at rest, because when your muscles are contracting, it's squeezing it out. Excuse me. There's two types, two readings of blood pressure. Systolic, so that's when the pressure is contracting in the ventricles, and the diastolic when the ventricles are at rest. So you've probably heard of blood pressure like 120/80. What that means is 120 is the systolic and 80 is the diastolic. So the top number, 120, means when your ventricles are contracting, and the 80 means when your ventricles are relaxed. Okay, so it tells you the pressure when it's actually being pushed through versus at just rest. Here's just a couple terms. Plaque. When you get plaque on the inside of your arteries, it's called arteriosclerosis, and when it actually causes the hardening of those arteries, it's called atherosclerosis. So put in, there's another bracket there. So those are the two terms to know the difference. Just the line of the wall versus atherosclerosis, when it actually starts getting hard. And we know when things start getting hard, it becomes a problem because it can increase the pressure in the vessels. So like I said, it causes high blood pressure or even tissue death if there's a complete blockage. So if we have this tissue that's blocked off here, let's see if we can get a pen going. Uh-oh, might have messed that up. So if there's a complete blockage, it means that no blood's going through, which means that no oxygen is going to be able to be provided in that area, which then means that tissue is going to die. And that's for the rest of the body. If those arteries are going back to the heart, that means that no blood's going back to the heart, not through it. Right? The coronary arteries are the blood vessels that surround the heart. If there's no oxygen going back to the heart, then the heart tissue dies, and the heart tissue dies, then it can't pump any of the blood to the rest of the body either. So that's a problem, obviously. The last thing is, we've talked about this in excretion. High salt diet can lead to water retention because the water flows into the blood, which increases the heart or increases the blood pressure. We call that hypertension. Hypotension is the low blood pressure, and it affects kidney filtration. As we talked about before, if there's low pressure, we're not going to be able to filter out all of those nutrients and toxins as well as we'd like to. And then also medulla can dilate and constrict arterioles to adjust the blood pressure as well. So we can have what's called vasodilators, which will cause this to stretch out. And if they're stretching, it's making for more volume, more space for things to fill up, and so it'll actually lower some of the blood pressure. So what do you need to know? these three things. So be able to describe the cardiac cycle, so what's happening. So when we're talking about the SA node causing the atria to contract, split second later, it sends a message to the AV node to contract the ventricles, and it does this via the Purkinje fibers. So these are just these nerves that are in the ventricles that will increase the amount of contraction. And then also just know the blood pressure terms that we talked about. So know what systolic means, diastolic. So systolic. Oh my goodness, we're back to the red pen. How did that happen? I forgot. Oh well. Systolic, diastolic, arteriosclerosis, and atherosclerosis. So if you have questions, which I'm sure some people will for this one, jot them down and we'll bring them up tomorrow. Don't forget to bring your athletic wear for tomorrow because we have a fun little lab to do. Okay? Have yourselves an outstanding night. Discard.